Hello, and welcome to the Amongst Romans podcast, your window to everything Italy from an outsider's perspective. Join us each week as we navigate the Italian way of life and all the adventures that come along with it. In this episode, I'm going to take you to some of my favorite museums in Rome. Although you can argue that Rome itself is an open-air museum, it's also home to some of the most world-famous treasures, and it has some of the best museums I've come across. Most people who come to Rome think of the Vatican. The Vatican Museums are definitely a place I think everybody should visit, especially if you like art, if you like Baroque, if you like all the great masters. The Vatican Museums are probably one of the best places for that. However, the Vatican is not the only museum that I think is worth visiting in Rome. So today I thought I can give you some of my favorite museums in Rome that you can visit, especially if you're there for the first time. Rome has a lot of museums and it's difficult to fit them all into one episode. So I'm going to just focus on the, 7 that I have here that I think are good if you are visiting Rome for the first time. So I'll cover some of my favorite museums, ones that I think are worth visiting. I'm not going to be covering the Vatican because I think most people who come to Rome will already have that on their list. The whole point of this is that I want to give you some alternates to visit, some other places that you can go to and take in the culture, the history, and everything else that Rome has to offer. So one of my favorite museums in Rome is the Capitoline Museums. It's in Italian, it's Musei Capitolini. And yes, it's called museums, not museum, because it's held in different buildings. If you're in Rome and happen to be by the Piazza Venezia, which is the famous square in Rome, and Capitoline Museums are just sort of tucked in behind it, you kind of have to go just around up the massive stairs and you'll get to, I think, one of the best museums in Rome. Many people go to the square that's there, but not many people actually go inside the museum, which I think is a huge miss. So again, it's located in 2 different museums. The Piazza del Campidoglio is what it's called, and both buildings are linked by the Galleria Lampidaria. This is an underground tunnel that goes beneath one of the buildings that's in the middle. And when you're inside, you can overlook the Roman Forum, and it's quite spectacular. In Capitoline Museums, you'll find some of the best collections of ancient sculptures. This includes both Greek and Roman statues, and an enormous bronze statue of Marcus Aurelius on horseback. So when you come into the square before you enter the museum, you have this guy on a horse, that's Marcus Aurelius. Now that's a replica. The actual real statue that they've recovered is inside the museum. So just that alone, I think is spectacular that they have this 2,000-year-old statue here on display. What I like about this museum is that you can also explore the history of Rome. There's a section which covers the early days. You have different mock-ups of what the city looked like at the early days of Rome and how it grew along with the city. I think it's quite fascinating. It's not something that you think of when you think of Rome. So again, it's a great place to explore. Now, what makes Capitoline Museums interesting is that it's one of the first public museums started by one of the popes. It came out of his personal collection of bronze statues that he dedicated to the people of Rome. And additional popes after that added on to the collection. You actually have some of the best artworks that you can find in the city, along with some of their bronze statues and also some of the busts that were recovered from ancient times. It's actually quite interesting to see. In addition to Marcus Aurelius on horseback, you'll also find the famous sculpture of Remus and Romulus suckling a she-wolf. Again, that's a symbol of Rome, and you will find the original statue here. There's also a collection that features Etruscan art and masterpieces by artists such as Titian, Rubens, and of course, Caravaggio. It's a great museum to explore. It's not that busy considering it's a popular spot. But what I find interesting is that most people who come here will probably not go inside the museum. When you come to the piazza with the statue of Marcus Aurelius on top of a horse in the middle, it's the two buildings on the left and right of it. The one behind it is actually the city hall, so you cannot go inside there. Like I mentioned before, there is the underground gallery that connects the two museums together. Now, this was all designed by Michelangelo. It's a great place to explore just for the history alone. Somebody like Michelangelo was here and he designed it all. He was the one with the vision and he was the one who put it all together. The buildings themselves are beautiful. The sculptures, the art really are spectacular. It's not that busy of a museum. If you compare it to the Vatican, it's a lot less busy. When we went, there was barely anyone there. When people come to this area, they don't really go inside the museum and don't explore all of it. If you come to Rome, you definitely should come visit the Capitoline Museums, and I think you will be pleasantly surprised. The next one I want to talk about is the Galleria Borghese. The Galleria Borghese is one of the most famous museums in Rome, and there's a good reason for that. The gallery is located in the Villa Borghese Park. This gallery has one of the most impressive collections of Italian and European art. Here you'll find works by Raphael, Caravaggio, and Rubens. The collection was started by Cardinal Scipione Borghese. So again, Borghese, the family, was a wealthy family in Rome, and they had many popes. One of them was this guy who started this collection. He was an avid art collector, and subsequent family members, including additional popes, continued that tradition. The Villa Borghese is located in a park of the same name. The park is the third largest green space in Rome. It's a beautiful place to explore. Every time I go to Rome, I try to make some time to go to the Villa Borghese Park. It's one of those parks that is a really huge place. You get some ponds, you get some interesting statues. But one of the things I like about it is there are green parrots that fly around. You can spot them when you sit down or you stroll around. You'll hear them, but if you really just sit there for a moment, you might actually spot them flying around. It's quite impressive because you don't really think of parrots flying around in Rome, but they do at the Galleria Borghese. Now, the museum itself is quite spectacular as well. So, there is the famous Bernini sculptures. I've already mentioned Caravaggio, and they are big players when it comes out of the Renaissance and, subsequent times. So, Bernini's Apollo and Daphne is the masterpiece. You must have seen that sculpture before. Caravaggio has the David with the head of Goliath. Again, Caravaggio was very dramatic. You have Titian, you have other beautiful artworks. It's a really beautiful museum to explore. And I think if you want to get away from the hustle and bustle of Rome, this is a great place for it. Not only do you get the great museum, you also get to hang out in a park, which is quite spectacular. So I always recommend that. It's a bit out of the way from the main sites, but I think it's really worth checking out. So I definitely recommend you check that one out. Now, the next one on the list is part of the National Roman Museum. The National Roman Museum is a collection of Roman art and artifacts, and it's spread across 4 different palazzos. So the one I'm talking about now is the Palazzo Massimo alle Terme. Palazzo Massimo is a beautiful Renaissance-style palace and houses some of the best archaeological and classical art collections in the world. You have 4 different floors filled with artifacts. You'll find treasures from the Greek and Roman world. Romans love Greek art, so you have a lot of that here as well. You'll have frescoes from the ruins of the Roman villas, which were found during the excavations back in late 19th century. But there's also a number of really great sculptures. So again, mosaics, sarcophagi, and reliefs, and portraits of famous figures from the past. It probably has one of the best preserved Roman frescoes and mosaics and jewelry you'll come across. anywhere else. It's a great place to just immerse yourself in the past and get a little taste of what life in Rome was like. If you're coming to Palazzo Massimo, there is, like I said already, there's 4 different palazzos. So if you get tickets for that, you might also be able to get a combined ticket that covers them all. So you'll be able to get a ticket that covers entrance to all of them, which could be a better deal. Now, if you're not coming to Rome for a very long time and you don't have a lot of time, you just want to see this one, that's also possible. It's actually not far from the Termini station, which makes it easy to pop in or after your visit. Spend an afternoon there, take a look, and enjoy that beautiful art around you. The next one, Palazzo al Temps, is also part of the National Roman Museum collection, and I think this was one of my favorite museums that we went to. Palazzo al Temps is a stunning 15th century building, and it used to be owned by the Riario family. So again, you have a lot of rich families that used to be in Rome that had palaces at some point or built them or owned them or lived in them. A lot of them have now become museums, and Palazzo al Temps is one of them. I loved Palazzo al Temps because honestly, it wasn't too busy. There was barely anyone inside, and I thought it was such a miss because it's such a great museum to explore. Again, it's a beautiful place to visit. It's got a really nice courtyard, and you might have seen pictures or videos of just like a little courtyard or like a balcony, but there's just these beautiful designs all over the place, like the ceiling, the walls. I'm not quite sure they're mosaics, but it's really beautifully detailed and it's very pretty. I really enjoyed being inside because, like I said before, there was not a lot of people in here. And they have a great collection of ancient Roman and Greek sculptures, which again come from private collections. It's a very beautiful museum, not just because of the sculptures and the art, but the building itself is beautiful. So if you're looking for sort of more off the beaten path, less busy type of experience, I would say definitely visit Palazzo al Temps. I loved it. I think it was a great place to explore. And again, it's included with the Palazzo Massimo tickets. If you have more time, I recommend you visit additional 2 museums that are part of this. This one is definitely one that should be on everyone's list. Now, the next one, I think is a bit of a different spin of museums, but I think it's also worth visiting. So we're talking about Centrale Monte Martini. This is one of Rome's most unique exhibition spaces because it's housed in a former power plant. It's a very different take on museums than you would imagine, especially in a place like Rome. So Centrale Monte Martini is, like I said, a former power plant, and now it has these really amazing ancient sculptures and industrial machinery. So you have this little blend of old and new mixing together. It's quite an experience to visit. And again, it's not that busy. It's not as packed as some of the other places. And, it's got some really great exhibits. Here you'll find the Capitoline Venus, the beautiful representation of the goddess of love. There are also other massive marble statues that are displayed around. You have mosaics, sarcophagi, and frescoes, which really offer a mix between the classical and modern contrast, which you don't expect to see that in Rome. And I think it's quite a fascinating place to explore. Now, the next one on the list is probably a museum that not many people consider, and it's Castel Sant'Angelo. If you're a fan of Dan Brown, you're probably familiar with it. It was featured in one of his books. I don't know if it was in Da Vinci Code or the other one, but anyway, Castel Sant'Angelo, I think, is a must visit for anyone coming to Rome. We came to Castel Sant'Angelo in the evening, so it wasn't too busy when we came. I think most people come during the day. Castel Sant'Angelo has really great views. If you come towards sunset at dusk, you get really great views of the river. And depends on where you look, you can also see the Vatican. Castel Sant'Angelo was originally built as a mausoleum for the Roman Emperor Hadrian. So it's about, I would say about almost 2,000 years old. It was a fortified building. It wasn't a castle or a palazzo the way we think of it. It was a fortress. Eventually, it was converted into a home for the popes. There is a secret passage between Castel Sant'Angelo and the Vatican. It was a way for the Pope to escape if he needed to, which is quite interesting. But again, that one is not open to the public. But there is a passage between the mausoleum and the Vatican for the Pope to escape. Now, what I loved about it is that from the outside, it just looks like this big old brick kind of structure. Inside, it's actually quite interesting. You can climb to the very top, and it's quite stark, I guess, maybe compared to the other museums, because it doesn't have exactly the same sort of vibe, but I really think it's quite interesting. You'll still have some Renaissance paintings, medieval weapons, and historical artifacts, but it doesn't feel like the same way as, like, let's say, a museum does, because it's designed differently. It looks really different, but I think it's really worth going to. So it gives you sort of an insight of what it looked like back in the day when the popes used to live there. This was used as a fortress, a prison, and a refuge for the pope. So it really had a multi-purpose use in the past. And you can really see a lot of the combination of ancient, medieval, and Renaissance history all around. So again, I think it's a great place to explore. And after your visit, there is a whole bunch of restaurants and bars, especially if you're there in the summertime. Along the river, you have to go a little bit down the steps. There's a whole bunch of restaurants and patios. You can just enjoy a drink and hang out after your visit. I really think the best time to visit would be sort of in the evening, just before the sun sets. Then you get to stay when the sun actually sets. Afterwards, you get to see Rome with the lights all lit up, and it's quite beautiful. So I think that's the best time to visit, but again, depends on when you're there. I think if you go during the day, it might be busier. I've seen lines outside of Castel Sant'Angelo, but if you go in the evening, it shouldn't be as busy. The last one I'm going to talk about is the Galleria Doria Pamphili. This was probably one of my favorite discoveries in Rome, I would say, because the museum itself is not quite, I don't want to say visible because it is, but it's not necessarily the most advertised. To get to it, if you are in Piazza Venezia, you just go down one of the main streets, and the Galleria Doria Pamphili sort of tucked in on the side. You'd kind of miss it if you don't know what you're looking for. During the day, the main door gate is open, so you can get a glimpse of the courtyard, which is quite beautiful. And I think that's how we came across it. We came and we saw, oh, wow, look at this. It's like a beautiful place. Let's go check it out. So again, the Doria Pamphili was a powerful Roman family. They also have Villa Doria Pamphili, which is a totally different part. That one is surrounded by a park. What we're talking about here is the Galleria, the Doria Pamphili Gallery, which is open to the public. Now, the family still lives in the building, so you don't have access to all of the areas, but you do get to see quite a bit. It's really beautiful when you go inside and you think this must have been someone's home. It's quite incredible. So again, the gallery is home to an incredible collection of Italian and European art. Again, the family is very wealthy. They had at least one or two popes in their family. So you do have the influence, right? They had the influence, they had the money. So you do have a collection of, I think it's like 500 paintings. And again, you have the famous masters, right? So you have Caravaggio, you have Velázquez, you have Titian, and you also have sculptures by Bernini. And it really is quite an interesting place because it feels more intimate, if you can say that. It's a bit more of an intimate feel, like you are not quite in someone's house, although you are, but it's a beautiful place to explore. It's a place that really isn't visited by as many people, which I think, again, is a mistake if you don't go there. But I think it's also easy to miss if you don't know what you're looking for. This is a private collection of art that has been amassed over the centuries by this family. And you get a glimpse into, what their, house looked like, this particular one. And really is incredible. You're walking through and it's a big area to explore. And that's not even all of it that's open to the public. So you kind of got to wonder what the rest of the place looks like. I think it's a beautiful museum. It's one of the ones that I think most people don't necessarily go to. It's quite nice. It's very intimate, if you can say, and it's really great to see. The Doria Pamphili was a powerful family. They had a lot of connections. You can see that in going inside, it kind of gives you an insight into, what rich families of the time were like. And quite clearly here, they were very influential. So I would definitely add this one to your list if you're coming to Rome. Now, these are just the 7 museums I mentioned. There are tons of other ones to explore. I am going to link in the show notes to a post about over 20 museums in Rome that I think you should visit. Not all of them are possible on your first visit, but if you come here, I think these 7 that I've mentioned here will be a great start. And if you have time for the other ones, I really think they're worth exploring. Rome is such a fascinating city, and it's not just the old ruins, it's not just the Vatican. There's just so many other things that you can explore, which will give you a different perspective on Rome and the people who lived here, who influenced the city, who had an impact because they had the money, the wealth, the influence. Going inside these places, you really get to experience that. I think it's quite fascinating. The museums here, a lot of them are inside palazzos, which used to be owned by some families or still are. And that's very unique. Not all places have the same type of setup. You can really see the history of Rome here. And if you are looking for that experience, these 7 museums will definitely get you there. Like I mentioned, there's a bunch of other ones that you can explore. And, that's a great reason to come back to Rome. Now, if you're thinking, I don't have enough time, how am I going to fit them all? You don't have to fit them all. Just add them to your list, and it's easy to fit them into your schedule. Consider getting the Roma Pass. It's a pass that gives you discounts to some of the museums. If you are visiting Rome, some of them are free on the first Sunday of the month, so that can also save you some money. If you are coming on the first Sunday of the month, there might be bigger crowds because, again, everybody is coming. But some museum, I think Galleria Borghese, you might have to make reservations ahead of time. So just double check because, again, depends on the time of the year. If you come during the busy season, it might be busier. They limit access because they don't want people to damage things. It's easier to keep track when there's crowd control. So again, if you're coming to Rome, you want to add these museums to your list. Get tickets ahead of time unless you're coming on the first Sunday of the month. Then pick which ones you're able to fit into your schedule. Explore them. I think you will love the museums in Rome. I know I do. I go all the time. And it's really, I think, a city that not many people think of as a city for museums, which again, it is. There's so many of them. These 7 museums are the ones I recommend for everyone visiting Rome, at least for the first time. Like I said earlier, I'm going to link the other museums in the show notes. If you have time or if you want to come back to Rome and explore some museums, I think it's a great place to start. I really hope you do get to hit some museums because they have so much great art. There's so much history and beauty in Rome that most people don't get to see because they only go to the Vatican. There's nothing wrong with the Vatican. I'm just saying there's so much else to see that, if you're only focusing on the Vatican, you might miss the rest. So with that, I really hope you enjoy the museums in Rome.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.